All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to our first YACU-Con of the year. We've restarted the numbers. This one would be 21, but because it's a new year and a new style of YACU-Cons, we've decided to put it back at 1. Um, so yeah, for those of you who are new, the Young Americans Coalition for Unity's mission is to primarily engage youth in politics and also to promote unity and bipartisanship. And we do this through a lot of different ways. We have 4 amazing volunteer teams: communications, digital, organizing, and political, led by their respective directors, as written there. We also host lots of different events. You can find them all at events.ysu.org. And we also have chapters at ysu.org/chapters. So we're doing a little bit of a different style today. We're inserting our speaker series into our YACU-Con. So today, our first part of our YACU-Con is going to be Engage. We're going to be having our speaker series. So a brief introduction. Today, our speaker series is with former state senator from Ohio, Senator Cafaro. She's currently the executive in residence at the American University School of Public Affairs, and she also teaches a course called Comparative Policy Analysis and U.S. and Canadian Health Policy and Delivery. Senator Cafaro has done a lot of work in health policy fields, especially focusing on Medicare and Medicaid in Ohio, and she has done a lot of work as a senator, as well as a political commentator as well. So we're excited to have you here today. Yeah, if you want the screen share, we can get you the perms for that, but let me know if you need that.
I do not need the screen share because I figured this would be a little bit more of a maybe an informal conversation to provide folks an opportunity to ask questions and really have a conversation. First of all, I want to thank you for thinking of me and reaching out, finding me through American University to be part of this event and to address all of you. As somebody who was involved in civic engagement and everything from political activism to model United Nations and everything in between, from the time I was an early teenager, 12, 13 years old, I find the fact that this organization exists and that it is student run, student started, is just an incredible testament to your commitment to engagement, to your community, and frankly, to taking a more creative and pragmatic approach to wanting to be involved in your community. I mean, usually it's, the Young Democrats, the Young Republicans, that, or certain volunteer community involvement type of things. But the fact that this organization is focusing on unity and bipartisanship, obviously on the backdrop of our current circumstances in the United States and frankly globally, as we see divisiveness and in certain circumstances, in certain nations, populism on the rise. It's great to see that young people are willing to talk about unity, bipartisanship, and a pragmatic approach to our common goals, and our common ability to solve problems. So thank you. That's a very long-winded way to say I'm very impressed. Particularly the like old Molly UN nerd in me that, I'm still 12 years old, 13 years old. When I do incredible things, I still think back to myself of like, how cool would I think would I think this is if like 12-year-old me knew what I was doing right now. So good for you guys. So I had some emails back and forth with some of the folks that had organized the event this evening. And so I guess I'll talk a little bit about my personal experience in public service, kind of how I ended up here. And one of the things that was brought up that I understand you guys want me to talk about a little bit is how things have evolved in public discourse and in politics since I first started, now, geez, almost 20 years ago, 17 years to be exact, which I'm happy to talk about. So I actually first ran for office in 2004. So I was 26 years old back then. And a lot has changed. A lot has changed. So I lost that first election. And then 2 years later, there was an opportunity. My predecessor in the state Senate was elected to a statewide office as Attorney General, which created a vacancy in the state Senate, which I was first appointed to and then subsequently had to run for election to hold the seat. We have term limits in the state of Ohio, so I served a full decade in the Ohio Senate. 4 of those years as minority leader. I was elected to minority leader when I was 30 years old, and I will tell you that was quite the experience. When I was elected minority leader in 2000, end of 2008, sworn in 2009, on the backdrop of a significant economic crisis, and a new president, the first African American president in American history. And then in Ohio, we had somewhat of a divided government. We had a Democratic governor, a Republican Senate, and a newly elected Democratic House. So there were a lot of moving parts, and I was the only female leader. So we had male governor, male speaker, the House, male president of the Senate, and a male minority leader in the House as well. So, when it came to who was in the room, it was me. And I was, 25 years at best, probably closer to 30 years younger than everybody else in that room, which certainly comes with its challenges, but also comes with its advantages because people don't see you coming. They make assumptions, and they assume that you are not equipped, with either the acumen or the guts to be a tough negotiator. So in some ways, that actually did work to my advantage. I first and foremost, while I'm a Democrat, as I said, I am a pragmatist. I am a public servant and I care about policy. So it was never really about party, even when I was a party leader as the minority leader. It was always about what can we do to make the lives of Ohioans better. So I worked frequently across the aisle with Republican colleagues. My first item of business when I was elected minority leader, gosh, 11 years ago, when I sat down with the president of the Senate and I said, I understand that we have never had a rule in the Senate to enable us to have bipartisan sponsored, dual sponsored bills like they have in Congress. So I was like, we need to be able to change this because without dual authorship between Democrats and Republicans, people in the minority are silenced in many ways, but we also don't have the opportunity to share in the dialogue, and the deliberative process that is, a bipartisan crafting of legislation that I believe yields a stronger and more well-rounded product. Thankfully, the president of the Senate at the time, the now late Bill Harris, agreed to that. And we still have bipartisan authored bills now in the Ohio Senate and in the Ohio House. So from that, myself, along with a number of my colleagues, were able to pass a number of bills into law in a bipartisan manner. Speaking for myself, I did Medicaid reform, prior authorization for health insurance in the state of Ohio. I worked on a number of economic development related bills, including creating our tourism bureau in the state of Ohio and the funding mechanism for that. And the list goes on. And so when you're able to work, in a bipartisan manner, my experience certainly has been that the product, the actual policy product is stronger. That people feel that they have buy-in, and I think the public trusts things more when they recognize that both sides have worked on the process. I would say that, well, there's always been acrimony, certainly, between the two political parties, and there's inevitably grandstanding and this sort of thing, particularly in election years, and tough votes that you have to take, and sometimes there are ceremonial type of votes that are pageantry to get people on the record, simply to use that vote to run ads against a candidate that may be vulnerable. That has happened forever. It happened when I was, in the state house. Um, it happens at the congressional level. Those things aren't new. But what is, I think, different, and has continued to, erode, is this desire that, um, people are unwilling to compromise. That compromise has become a dirty word. That compromise somehow is a sign of weakness. And this is pervasive at the federal level, and I think we don't have to, look very far to see it in action. I mean, just taking a look at the COVID relief packages that have been languishing for months. Yes, it's a presidential election year, and yes, things are very contentious, but something like this should not necessarily be, so polarizing. I mean, you have thousands of people dying, thousands of people unemployed. Um, People at risk, people getting evicted. You would think that Democrat and Republican alike would step to the plate. But I think that there are three main things that have been, um, really playing into this enhanced sense of polarization, and why organizations like yours are so important, because we have to start now, with the youngest group of people possible, to undo the damage that I think has been done over the last 15 to 20 years. And one is gerrymandering. Um, the fact, and it happens at the state and the federal level, but gerrymandering has, consistently, I think, created an environment where members of Congress or members of state legislatures have no desire, no willingness, and no motivation, politically at least, to compromise, because of the fear that they may be primaried from the left or from the right. And so if you have a 60-40 district, a heavily Republican or a heavily Democratic district, then, why would you want to compromise? Because I mean, look, people go into politics for a whole host of reasons. To me, it's never about trying to keep your job, but that's a reality of the game. I recognize that. I certainly am not naive, but you would hope that, I mean, if you go back further, if you go back to the 80s and the early 1990s, and you see, you know, uh, when you had more congressional districts in certain states because of population, and you had more competitive districts. So you're dealing with 50-50, 54%, whatever, divided districts. You have a much more competitive electoral environment, and you have because it's a much more mixed, um, political demographic that is your constituency. So gerrymandering is a major contributing factor, and it has been a problem probably since the 1990 census, and has only been exacerbated over the last 30 years in the last two censuses. Um, and now what we've seen over the last 5 to 7 years is a gear up in anticipation for the 2020 census and the 2022 electoral, or the congressional and legislative maps. And so a number of states have adopted, redistricting commissions, and they've gone through redistricting reform. So there is a start of an attempt to try to reverse this, what I would say is a damaging trend in gerrymandering. So we'll have to see in the 2022 midterms whether or not these redistricting commissions actually, number one, do yield more competitive districts, and number two, if those competitive districts yield, more actual competitive races, attract more, moderate candidates, or candidates on both sides that are willing to not just pander to one side or one extreme or the other. So I think 2022 will be very important to see how things unfold. Campaign finance reform is another thing, which has consistently been an uphill battle, and even more so of an uphill battle since all of the Supreme Court, rulings related to campaign finance and Citizens United and everything that has gone with that in the last, 10 to 15 years. And then the third, and I think most poignant, in recent years, and I think the biggest change that I have seen since I've been in. Since I've been, my name was first placed on the ballot in March of 2004, is certainly, social media slash cable news. And these echo chambers and the ability for information to travel as fast as it does now did not exist at all when I first ran. You don't maybe think 2004 four was that far away. Maybe I certainly do. Maybe you guys were born in 2004. I don't know. But so, to me, it doesn't seem that long ago. But 2004 does not seem like ancient times. It's not, oh my gosh, we're dealing with some sort of computer mainframe that's as big as a house. There were cell phones, there was the internet, but I mean, it was pretty weak. And you had some blogs, but it was really, not the same thing that we think of now. A lot of them, were, they weren't considered credible at all. You sort of had comment sections on the websites of newspapers. It just was not the same. And when I was, ran again in 2006, even in that 2-year time frame, I saw the proliferation of social media and the use of MySpace, believe it or not, and then blogs increased just in that 2-year period of time. Through the years, you saw more Facebook usage and then some Twitter usage and the list goes on and on. And so, now we're at a point where everybody is basically signed up for their own echo chambers. They people have the opportunity. You would think that with so much information, so much access to content, that we would become more educated, more have a larger worldview, because we have access to the whole world, access to information about the whole world from the entire globe right in our in our phone. um, the opposite has happened, and I don't need to tell you guys that. It's common sense. So now the world has gotten smaller and smaller and smaller, because I think people are overwhelmed by content, but you have this you know uh, again, proliferation of people wanting to have this affirmation of their worldview. And then you overlay that with what's happened over the last 5 years of this concept of fake news and alternative facts, which, really creates a very difficult circumstance because how do you try to even extend an olive branch to someone and have a conversation about difference of opinion when it's not about difference of opinion? People are literally cannot agree on a base level of facts, and that is incredibly disheartening. And again, why I think an organization like yours is so important, because we need to strip this all back to brass tacks. We need to start all over again in some ways, and get back to basics, and recognize that we are not each other's enemy, that a difference of opinion does not mean the other person is a horrible human being. um, but we have to figure out a way to have a basic level of a set agreed upon set of facts and an agreed upon set of values. And I think we're also seeing that we are meandering apart when it comes to what our values are. And I think that the last 5 years have really, you know, had people raise a lot of questions amongst themselves, to their friend groups, to their families, to their communities, and to the greater population at large. What are our values? What are American values? What are my own personal values? And how do I expect, my government, my community, my elected officials to reflect and manifest those values? Um, those are all very important conversations to have, and we need to be able to have them in a respectful, and congenial, way, that where discourse is welcomed, and not uh, toxic. And we're not going to be able to move past this inflection point in our nation if we're not able to find a way to do just that, to talk about what our values are, why our values differ, what direction we want our nation to go, how we want to get there, And frankly, it's not just about Washington or the State House. It's not just about Capitol Hill or Capitol Square. It's also about our own individual communities because it's not always just about politics, too. It is about how you are engaged in your individual community, whether it's, doing, a food drive or volunteering for an organization in some way, shape, or form, or in your schools. All of that is a very important point in civic engagement. And when you really get down to the local level and you think about things like food security, and food distribution or infrastructure, um, or just those sort of things. When you get into the things that are directly related to your community and your backyard, oftentimes the Democratic and Republican labels or whatever kind of ideology fall aside. They fall by the wayside because people share this one same community and they're focused on that rather than labels. And so I think that, it's important to engage in those more granular, localized community activism, community engagement, advocacy, volunteerism, because that's a good starting point to show that we're all on the same team and we all want to achieve the same things for our community because we're only sort of as strong as the weakest link. But I will also say this, as someone we have term limits in Ohio, I think I said, and so I've been out for 4 years now, and what I have noticed, because I've continued to be engaged in my local community on a number of boards and volunteerism and whatnot. It's rather than, for example, giving a bunch of money to, I don't know, the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee or, the ACLU or whatever. Like rather than doing those sort of things or volunteering in some sort of large way, I have found that I know that my impact means a lot and means more. And I know it actually goes someplace when I am involved in my local community. So for me, even though I've sort of like gone from here to here as a private citizen, I find that, the local civic engagement is always a place where you can make a difference. So, I want to open it up for questions and comments because I could talk forever. And I'm also as on faculty at American University. I do teach a number of courses. Actually, this semester, starting this week, upcoming week, I'm teaching social policy this semester. Last spring I taught. Child and family policy, and actually in the fall I taught undergraduates. Usually I teach graduate students. I did a special course specifically on the 2020 election, which was interesting. So I don't know how many of you are high school. I don't know versus college, but happy to talk about that experience as well. So if you don't mind, I guess I'll just open it up for questions if people are interested.
Yeah, definitely. So you can use the raise your hand people if you want to ask a question, or you can just send a message in the chat and we can read it out loud. So yeah, if any you, I know someone had messaged me, Will, if you have a question, you can go ahead.
Are they on mute?
I don't see him in the. He could
Actually,
have done. Okay. Well, that's okay. If anyone has any questions, please go ahead, raise your hand. I'm gonna ask a question first while I'm at it, actually.
sure.
So this is relevant to something that I read on your page because you mentioned you've done work with like Ohio Medicare, Medicaid, particularly with the 2012 election where Obama and Romney were really you
Mhm.
know pitching it out over Obamacare, of
Okay,
course,
sure.
and how Romney wanted to repeal and replace, and a lot of Republicans at the time. I guess what were your thoughts and like on a state level, because that was a big discussion at the national level, but how did states, especially I guess in your case Ohio, feel about Medicare, like control to the states and that sort of thing?
It was very contentious. I mean, so in 2010, then Governor Strickland, who was a Democrat, lost to Governor John Kasich, who a Republican, who many of you are probably familiar with since he ran for president and has taken a pretty national role. And so, in the 2010 election and those midterms was a very big year. It was the rise of the Tea Party, and the issue of the ACA, of Obamacare, was a flashpoint for many incoming, particularly Republican members of Congress. Many Democrats that came in with the Obama wave in 2008 lost, and they became one-termers because they voted for the ACA. And so, as we had to implement aspects of the ACA, which were shared in many ways as a state-federal partnership, there was a great reluctance to do so. So, for example, the ACA provided a choice to states of whether or not they wanted to implement their own state exchange, or if they wanted to, basically default to a federal exchange. That's the health insurance marketplace where you can go on during open enrollment and buy an individual plan, or in certain states, a small business shop plan. So you would think that if you sort of run the, ideological train of thought out, that small government, 10th Amendment conservatives would want the states to control the exchange. That was not the case, because the ACA, it was seen as an affirmation of the Affordable Care Act, that if you were to do anything that the ACA prescribed, then therefore it was a tacit endorsement of it, and it was frowned upon. So we defaulted to, the federal exchange in Ohio, and there are some other underlying things with that. And then with Medicaid expansion, it was very much the same thing. And, that's where, my Medicaid reform bill came in with, which I did with a Republican who just was term limited this year, Dave Burke, opposite side of the state, opposite side of the aisle. He's a pharmacist. I'm a licensed social worker. And so what we set out to do was create a piece of legislation that would address a lot of the issues that the naysayers for Medicaid expansion had, in order to try to, actually, codify Medicaid expansion in Ohio for the long term, because you had folks. So John Kasich was actually fine with Medicaid expansion. So to fast forward a couple of years, he actually supported Medicaid expansion. The fully controlled Republican legislature was against it. The House actually removed the Medicaid expansion legislation provisions in the budget and replaced it with a provision to explicitly forbid the state of Ohio to expand Medicaid. To which Governor Kasich line item vetoed that provision. So we still went forward, but there are all these machinations we had to deal with in order to get us to get the money for Medicaid expansion to Ohio, to get it appropriated because it's federal dollars. And then again, assuage some of the concerns by those that were worried that what happens if there is a change in administration and the ACA gets repealed somehow, then all of a sudden we have this a larger group of beneficiaries that we can't pay for. So just because the federal government's getting us money, how can we make sure that we can continue to serve this new beneficiary population? We got a ton of actuaries and academics involved. We ran all these different models. We, created provisions essentially that we wanted to slow the growth of Medicaid spending without kicking people out. But part of that was very much contingent upon that expansion population being included, because they are younger and healthier than the population at large. Not to go super in the weeds, but the bottom line was that took an entire year. And because of that, basically because of Medicaid reform, it opened the door 2 years later for, us to codify Medicaid expansion, sort of permanently. We did it it was a very weird end around outside of the statute that we were able to do Medicaid expansion, but with reform, we were able to tamp some of those issues down. And so, it did become an issue in the 2012, elections, at the state level as well. Do you support Obamacare? Don't you support Obamacare? Do you support Medicaid expansion? Don't you support Medicaid expansion? I mean, so those issues were out there, and we also had a ballot initiative on in 2011 that basically spoke to essentially saying that like we shouldn't, it was kind of like more of a resolution that like the state of Ohio essentially doesn't support the ACA. So it's been a lot of back and forth. As time has passed, the goalpost has moved with the ACA, with Medicaid expansion in particular, not just in Ohio, but a number of states, particularly as the Trump administration has allowed for work requirements, to be attached to the Medicaid expansion population. So since I've been out of office, there's been a number of things that have occurred, waivers that have been applied to the federal government to get those uh, work requirements, into Medicaid expansion, because essentially there was a lot of basically push and pull, not only for those, sort of deficit hawks that were concerned that it's not free money from the federal government, but ultimately people that want a quote unquote hand up and not a handout. That there was no accountability by this group of able-bodied Medicaid beneficiaries, and that there would be overutilization of the system, and because there was no quote unquote skin in the game, so you have to have them have some kind of cost sharing. So there was a lot of back and forth based in pretty standard ideology surrounding that. So it remains an issue of political contention, I think, all across the country. But we've also seen that people do believe that Medicaid expansion works. Medicaid expansion is important, and those states with Medicaid expansion have actually been able to address some of the aspects of the COVID pandemic in a more effective manner. And so in more conservative states like Nebraska, for example, and I believe Oklahoma more recently, um, the Medicaid expansion has gone directly to like a ballot initiative because the legislatures would not actually act on it because the elected officials saw it as more toxic, but the people actually voted to implement Medicaid expansion. And then some states actually went back and then put constraints on it. So there's a lot of back and forth, very, very interesting stuff that's good, that how Medicaid expansion has evolved, and how the ACA has evolved as well, as far as its public opinion about it over the last decade.
Yeah, definitely very interesting. We also have one question that from a chat member. So we have Griffin asking, how would you best recommend getting involved in a local or state campaign? And also this side note, we'll be talking about this briefly later.
Okay, awesome. So if you're interested in, getting involved in a local or state campaign, seriously, I mean, just people at the local and state level like really need your help, because oftentimes they get totally overlooked. So whether you're city council or mayor or township trustee or state rep or state senator, nobody thinks about you. You're kind of an afterthought. And frankly, I would hope that after the 2020 election, people recognize the amount of power state legislators have over really, 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 really important things: electoral college, election law. A lot of battles get fought at the state level. Particularly since we've seen so much gridlock at the federal level. So, it is certainly not, a step down from, if you're looking at it that way, from like, volunteering on a congressional. You're going to get more experience trying, on a local or state campaign than you would most likely on a federal campaign. And it's real simple. I mean, usually, if you want to figure out who's running for what, you can go to your local board of elections website. You can look at your county party websites, for example, or your state party websites, identify who those candidates are that have filed for election. Most of the time now, everybody's got a website. Take a look at their platforms, and just reach out and contact them. People may not have a campaign headquarters necessarily, but they will be happy to take your help. Tell them you want to go door to door. Tell them that you would want to do things like visibility at community events. In small communities like mine, and most communities across the country, community event visibility is very important. So, in the summertime, fairs and festivals, wearing their T-shirts, handing out stickers, going to Around here, fish fries are very important, during the Lenten season coming up. So it's spaghetti dinners, all those things, getting out there in the community and being in, again, in the Midwest, but again, all over the country. But parades are really important too. And it's really hard to get manpower to be in all these parades, particularly if you don't have a million kids. When I was doing this, it's just like hard if you don't have like a built-in family when you're young. It's like, you got to like get every single friend to roll out in t-shirts and like be in these parades. So trust me, people want more bodies in parades. They do. They want more bodies in t-shirts at events. They want more people out there handing out stickers at, or literature if you're allowed out in the parking lot of high school football games. They want all of these things. And so email them, tell them you're willing to do that stuff. They will be more than happy to like have you pick up a box of t-shirts, literature, and stickers to get out there. So it's easier than you think. And we're in an off year election. So some states like Virginia, for example, it's a gubernatorial year. In New York City, it's a mayoral election. Most odd years are mayor's races. Some have gubernatorial, handful of United States Senate races, no real legislative races, for the most part. That still sort of trends on the even years, but reach out. They want your help. And they thank you for recognizing that their candidacy exists.
Yeah. So do we have any last minute questions? Because we want to be aware of your time.
Thank you.
Yeah, I've got one. How would you recommend, like, as someone who's done so much that's been bipartisan throughout your career, how would you recommend facilitating bipartisan discussion with people who feel very strongly about their partisan beliefs?
I think that it's important to listen before you argue. And it's hard for me too sometimes. But I think that and it's also, you have to really listen to try to figure out where the common ground is, because I think that there is an assumption that if you have strongly held beliefs, that there is absolutely no common ground. And so I think you need to listen very carefully about where you think you might be able to find that common ground. So, I'll give you a weird example of certain things. So it's like, when we were dealing with Medicaid reform, look, I recognize the ideological argument of wanting people to have some skin in the game financially, for either premiums, some kind of out-of-pocket cost, whether it's $2, $5, $10, whatever. But I also recognize, having spent years training in the hospital system as a social worker, dealing with case management, a whole host of other things, that Medicaid beneficiaries are simply not, you know, they're not equipped necessarily on the front end financially, or from a habit perspective, to have the kind of savings necessary. To you and me, $2 might not sound like a lot, but $2 to $5 it could be, the difference that makes or breaks people. So, and they're not used to paying those premiums. It's never been a premium supported or copay supported plan. So I would talk to folks and say, okay, I get where you're coming from. Acknowledge it. Acknowledge it. I understand why you may think that, but recognize that, there's a bigger picture here, and maybe think about phasing it in and not creating penalties on the front end. So, okay, you let them know, you give them some education on the front end of how this is going to work for the first 3 months of enrollment. Then, you give them three, strikes and you're out for, paying, you increase incrementally by like 50 cents the premium or copay that you want them to pay. So we're not saying screw you, you're wrong. How dare you think poor people can pay premiums? It's like, okay, well, number one, what do we want? We want them to have healthcare coverage. We don't want you to say no if they don't get, if they don't pay $2 out of pocket, then we just want them kicked off, or they will never be eligible. It's like, okay, if the sticking point is they pay this or there's nothing, well, let's see where we can meet in the middle. And so it's about trying to find those, getting creative about it too, and trying to find those areas of compromise. And so when you are actually crafting legislation or dealing with a specific policy problem, you oftentimes are faced with a very specific jigsaw puzzle that you have, like a formula you have to solve, right? In your sort of day-to-day conversations, it's not as specific, and it's not as, I won't say dire, but you don't have like a specific end game. It's not like, if we don't do this by June 30th, we constitutionally are going to go broke, and so we have to figure it out, or else, or like there'll be a government shutdown in Washington or whatever. So, you're not going to have that if you're just like talking to somebody randomly. But, I would say resist the desire to, argue, and try to listen, try to see where, understand where they're coming from, and allow them to understand where you're coming from too. And it's not going to change overnight. It's not. I mean, a lot of damage has been done, a lot. And it's going to take a long time to undo this damage, uh, to roll back these kind of attitudes that have been, um, fully integrated into the mainstream of our society, and in our public discourse. I would also suggest taking a look at, and you probably are familiar with some of these organizations, but No Labels, which is, an advocacy organization, and, bipartisan organization that also has something called the Problem Solvers Caucus. They had them at the state level, of which I was a part of. They have them at the federal level. The Problem Solvers Caucus actually was an integral part of trying to put together the last COVID relief package. So checking out things like No Labels, and then the Bipartisan Policy Center. I'm actually a fellow at BPC, and they have an incredible amount of resources as well, including something that was quite cute but useful. They put out these bipartisan placemats for Thanksgiving with different activities and icebreakers and things. So check them out. I mean, they have a lot of very, heavy and specific, policy work and white papers and everything. But BPC and No Labels are committed, I think, very similar to your organization, to finding that common ground and engaging in, in productive dialogue.
All right. So thank you, Senator Cafaro, so much for your time. We've definitely a lot of meaningful things that you've talked about today, and on a variety of topics, and I'm sure everyone really enjoyed it. So that concludes our first part of our YACU-Con with the speaker series stuff, and the stuff that you talked about is really relevant to other things that we're
Awesome.
talking about today. So the next thing is in addition to our big three, as you can see in my camera, engage. So we've engaged in political discussion. Next, we're going to be focusing on promoting unity and bipartisanship, and this is something that we've been doing for a bit now. We recently launched our Youth Unity Pledge, and as well as a brief guide to bipartisan political discussion. So if anyone here has not signed the Youth Unity Pledge yet, make sure you sign it and share it with a few friends. We're trying to get as many people to sign it as possible, and it's more important than ever that we build bipartisanship and unity. So as you can see here, if you could go to youthunitypledge.com, you can check out the pledge here. In addition, there's one for politicians and elected officials to sign as well, on a separate tab here. And we have all of this for you to help spread information about, how to be bipartisan and other stuff like that, especially among young people. And the last thing is also, again, relevant, volunteering and interning locally. So right now, a lot of congressional and even local offices are obviously closed for, COVID. But sometimes there are still, remote internships or stuff like that available. So if anyone out there is interested in any sort of local senator, state representative, like on any level, you can do a few things. You can obviously Google their name and then internships. You can reach out directly, like check out their webpage, and or like sometimes they'll have, their own internship pages, as you can see to the side there. And sometimes They also have, just an email where that you can email and say, hey, I'm interested in, interning for your office or something like that. Also, the US Senate has a continuously updated web page that is right here as well. So I will put this link in the chat if any of you guys are interested in that. And in addition, something that is really powerful in the world of politics is also networking. So starting to talk with, other people that you've worked with in politics. If you worked for a campaign, maybe talk with your, volunteer organizer, someone like that, and say, hey, I'm interested in looking for a position in this congressional office or in this state level office. Do you know anyone that might be able to help me get this kind of position and stuff like that? So that's really it for the action center of the YACU-Con today. But we also have our member rep election. So Derek, if you want to take it away.
Yeah. So we just held the election for the YCU member rep for the months of January and February. And I am happy to announce that the winner was Steve Brown. So Steve will be joining the YCU board for the next 2 months to represent the members' interests. And Steve, I can see you're in the Zoom here. If you'd like to say a few words, you can. You're muted if you're trying to talk.
I definitely didn't prepare any words at the moment, but I will very happily accept the nomination as member rep. And I did prepare a PowerPoint. It was, more for the election part, but I can still portray it so we can get the members a little bit more familiar with me as a person. How would you feel about that, Derek?
Questions or comments, we'll just do this after Steve. But no, we're not doing that. So yeah, this concludes our YACU-Con first one of the year, and we're excited to see, our new format, how it goes. I believe Michael has also sent all of you a YACU-Con feedback form. So if you could all fill that out, we'd be very grateful so we can get your feedback, improve these YACU-Cons and get similar and also equally amazing speakers as we had Senator Cafaro today. So yes, thank you all for coming to our YACU-Con. Don't forget to like and subscribe. And yeah.